I wasn't surprised when the email came. I was surprised it took this long. My name is Diana Mercer. I spent 11 years as the company's final review analyst. I didn't write the reports, I didn't present them. I was the last one to look them over before they left the building. If something didn't line up, between teams, between totals, between months, I fixed it. Quietly, consistently. My name was never on the front page, but the numbers that made it there were clean because I saw what others didn't look for. For 11 years, not a single quarterly submission under my watch failed audit. Not one. It wasn't because I was special, it was because I asked the questions others skipped when they were in a hurry. I didn't move fast. I moved thoroughly. That was my job. Until Lucas Hale showed up. Lucas was the new reporting director, young, sharp-suited, and convinced that speed was the same as success. In his first department meeting, he said his goal was to trim anything that doesn't move the story forward. A week later, he started identifying non-essential roles. Mine was near the top of the list. I didn't expect a discussion. I got a generic email from HR with his name CC'd. It said my position had been eliminated as part of budget restructuring. No mention of my work, no handover, no review of what I had done for over a decade. Just a silent cut in the name of progress. Lucas told others I made things too complicated, that I was slowing down the team, that my level of scrutiny no longer fit the pace of modern reporting. What he meant was, I didn't let things slide just because they looked clean on the surface. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for reconsideration, but I also didn't walk away empty-handed. Before my access was cut, I backed up the final version of our last verified report, the one I had fully reviewed before the transition. I also removed my formulas from the shared templates, cleared out the flags I used to set for reconciling quarterly shifts, and deleted my embedded notes. The ones that told the next person where things usually went wrong. They didn't want my work, so I made sure they wouldn't inherit the part of it they never understood. The person they hired after me was young, ambitious, eager to impress. Mira submitted faster than I ever did because she didn't stop to ask how each number came together. Lucas praised her openly, told the executive team that the department was finally operating without friction. What he meant was, there was no one left to slow him down by telling him to check again. Before we dive deeper into what really happened, if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend hitting that button and turning on the bell, so you won't miss the next story they hoped no one would tell. If this one already feels too familiar, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 and let me know how I can tell these stories better for you. I didn't reach out, I didn't warn them, but I watched, not because I wanted revenge, just because I knew exactly what would happen when nobody checked the full picture. And I still had one copy of the last report that made sense. The next report came out 6 days earlier than it ever had during my time. That was Lucas's first public win. A faster cycle, a leaner output. He mentioned it in every meeting that month. Fewer eyes, fewer steps, fewer hours. And in his words, finally a system that works. It was exactly the kind of result executives like to celebrate. Clean numbers, no delays, no visible friction. He called it operational maturity. But I knew better than to mistake speed for accuracy. There's a difference between smooth execution and unchecked shortcuts. Mira was the perfect figurehead. Young, responsive, optimistic. She didn't question the data she received from other departments. She didn't slow things down with clarifying emails. And she didn't flag small inconsistencies because she didn't know what patterns to look for. I don't blame her. That part of the job was never in her instructions. My work had always been quiet. That was the point. If I did it well, no one noticed. But now that I was gone, no one noticed what was missing either. A former colleague forwarded me a copy of the new report. She thought I'd find it encouraging, a sign that the department was running smoothly without all the politics. I thanked her, then I opened it. Not because I wanted to critique it, but because I couldn't help myself. The first few pages looked fine. Totals matched. Formatting was crisp. There were no open comments, no revision logs. But on the third tab, I noticed something I couldn't ignore. A funding ratio that had never been equal before was now balanced to the decimal. Over a decade of fluctuation between two divisions, gone. Smoothed out like a showroom floor. It wasn't impossible. But it was statistically strange. Those numbers had always resisted symmetry because the departments operated on separate cycles. Unless someone had changed how the source data was being grouped or trimmed, it didn't make sense. It looked too perfect. I pulled up the final version I'd archived before I lost access. Sure enough, the natural variation was still there in my copy. Slight, imperfect, honest. What Mira submitted wasn't an error, it was adjusted. Whether on purpose or not, I couldn't say. But I knew what it meant. Small changes like that don't break a report, but they warp its integrity, slowly, quietly, until no one remembers what the real version looked like anymore. I saved the file, took screenshots, annotated the shift in a folder on my desktop. Not because I planned to use it, just because I knew I might need to remember the moment it started. Lucas wasn't finished. After that quarter, he cut out 2 more steps from the submission process, ones that had existed to cross-check entries between reporting cycles. He said they were redundant, that the system trusts the numbers now. I wondered who decided what that system was. He started using words like frictionless and cost-aware in his weekly updates. He called it progress. He said we were finally working like a modern company. He even gave a short talk to the finance interns about how legacy processes hide waste. What he didn't say was that those legacy processes were built to protect the company from mistakes that didn't show up until it was too late to fix them. I watched as the layers disappeared, not in one big cut, but piece by piece. What used to be slow by design had become dangerously fast, and no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they did and chose not to say anything. I didn't intervene. I didn't explain what that one smoothed-out chart actually meant. I just kept the copy and kept watching. It wasn't wrong, not yet, but it wasn't real either, and I still had the last version that was. Lucas didn't just want to move fast. He wanted to prove it. The month after the second report went out, he booked a private meeting with the CEO to showcase what he called a cultural upgrade in execution. Those were his words. Not cleaner data, not stronger controls, just faster charts and shorter files. He walked in with Mira's numbers, called them modern, intuitive, scalable. The executive summary was 3 pages, not 10. The graphs all leaned upward, and none of it had been delayed by legacy approvals. That phrase came up more than once. I didn't see the meeting, but I heard about it from the same people who used to send me reports before final submission. One of them forwarded Lucas's presentation deck, whispering in the subject line, "This is what replaced you." I opened it slowly. Slide by slide, I watched him erase my name, not by calling me out, but by pretending the work I'd done had never mattered in the first place. He referred to the old process as bloated and manual heavy. Said it created fear of accountability by putting too many eyes on the same number. That line stayed with me for days. Fear of accountability, the one thing I had spent years protecting them from. And no one pushed back. Not the CFO, not the board. Because Lucas had a story that sounded better than the truth. That reports were finally clean because someone had cleared the people who used to check them. The strangest part wasn't the silence from the people I used to work with. It was how quickly they adapted. Some of them had fought for extra review time, cross-department feedback, and 3-layer validations. Now they just shrugged and said, if it works, it works. But I knew that wasn't how it worked. The third report came out with more polish than ever. Every visual was smoother, every section lighter. Mira had started using color schemes and pre-built templates. She made it look beautiful. No one noticed that 2 sections had been combined. Not because the data was the same, but because they were harder to match now that Lucas had removed the transition step between them. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't even lazy. It was convenience, reinforced by praise. And convenience, once rewarded, becomes procedure. I saved the deck, labeled it narrative, not structure. Then I made a note for myself. Compare allocation split in Q2 to Q1. I didn't need to act yet. I just needed to stay ahead of where the line was starting to blur. That week, someone from internal controls, Malik, a mid-level analyst, pinged me from his personal email. We hadn't spoken in months. His message was short. Do you remember why we used to flag account 2433 in split reports? Mira's version didn't mention it. I didn't reply, not yet. But I opened the old thread, account 2433. Of course I remembered. That was the one that had caused a 5-figure misstatement 3 years ago. the one Lucas called historical clutter in his new rollout. I opened my archived tracker and found the exact line. Then I opened Mira's version. The line wasn't just misaligned, it was gone. I highlighted the row, took a screenshot, and saved it in a new folder. This time, I didn't just label it by quarter, I labeled it by name. They were building something new, but I wasn't done keeping track of what they'd erased. I could have said something. Not publicly, not dramatically, just a message. A quiet reminder to Malik about that missing line in Mira's file. A suggestion to double-check how the totals were reconciling across departments now that they'd combined segments that were never meant to overlap. But I didn't, because I knew what would happen if I did. Lucas would defend his process. Mira would follow his lead. They'd double down, not fix it. And I'd be giving them a chance to bury the flaw before it surfaced. So I let it drift. That quarter, Lucas removed the final interdepartmental check, the one that used to run overnight before reports were locked. He said it was a waste of hours and that internal trust was more important than duplicate calculations. I'd once built that check myself, not to duplicate anything, but to catch what slipped when everyone trusted everyone else to catch it. Now it was gone. The gap widened, not in numbers, not in charts, but in logic. The summary still looked solid, but one line from the expense sheet started bleeding into the capital budget, not visibly, just enough to shift totals by a few thousand. Enough to knock projections out of sync the next quarter. I knew the signs because I'd spent over a decade pulling them back before anyone saw. And now I watched them grow. Mira reached out once, not to ask about the numbers, but to ask if I still had a template from 2 years ago. She said she couldn't find a copy, and the new one looked off but passed review. I said I didn't have it. That part was true. I didn't have the new one she was using, only the last one that still made sense. I could tell by her tone that she knew something wasn't quite right. But she wasn't going to say it out loud, not while Lucas kept telling her she was refreshing the culture and breaking old habits. That kind of praise can make you ignore your own questions. So I watched another file come out, this one wrapped in polished visuals and short narratives. 3 departments submitted identical figures for overhead, a red flag I'd have caught in seconds. But now it passed straight through. The systems weren't failing. They were succeeding at exactly what Lucas had built them to do. Move quickly, say less, get approved. It wasn't sabotage. It was something worse. It was indifference rewarded by speed. By now, I had 8 versions of the new reports saved in my archive, each with a note, a discrepancy, a timestamp. I wasn't collecting them out of bitterness. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just believed in gravity. And I knew the moment they stopped checking the bottom line, something would start pulling down everything above it. Mira's name was on every summary now. Lucas's name was on every sign-off. Mine was gone. But the structure they'd broken was still holding. Barely, and I wasn't going to fix it for them. It wasn't the kind of mistake that explodes on page 1. It came tucked inside a quiet table, 3 layers down in the quarterly summary. The total cost claim from regional units was off by just under $5 million. Not missing, just unmatched. The total they were reporting didn't align with the sum of the sections they'd submitted. It wasn't a math error. Every section checked out on its own. But when put together, they didn't make sense. A roll-up total that couldn't be recreated, a number that seemed to come from nowhere, because it had. The CEO saw it first. He called Lucas into his office at 9:15 a.m. after reading the file on a plane the night before. The report was already published to the board. Lucas walked in calm, explained that it must have been a formatting issue. Possibly a legacy formula, he said. Something that had been carried over from older versions of the report logic. He said the old team had a habit of layering hidden calculations that didn't adapt well to the new structure. He named me once. Softly, carefully. He didn't accuse. He just implied that the root of the inconsistency might trace back to systems I used to manage. Mira sat in silence. Her hands were clasped together in her lap, just under the table. She didn't say it was her file. She didn't say the totals had been compiled manually this time. She didn't say the overnight validation step had been removed, because none of that would have helped. Lucas offered to clean the issue for next quarter and submit a clarification note. But the CEO didn't want a clarification. He wanted to know why no one caught the problem before it went out, why a number that didn't match anything beneath it had been signed, sealed, and delivered, without a single flag. That afternoon, Lucas asked the IT team to retrieve the previous year's final submission, one I had signed off on. He wanted to check whether the mismatch originated earlier. That was his phrase. A way to dig for anything, any tiny inconsistency that he could tie back to me. But he wouldn't find it. I remembered the report in question. I remembered the numbers. I remembered the line items that had nearly caused friction and how I'd restructured the cost categories to avoid a cross-classification error. I remembered because I had the logic path saved in my archive, and because it wasn't mine that had drifted. It was theirs. They were just looking in the wrong place. If you've ever been blamed for something that broke after you were gone, comment 1 below. I know what that feels like, and I know what it costs to hold your ground when silence becomes accusation. I wasn't in the room, but my name was, and I wasn't done with this story yet. They didn't ask me to come back. They asked me to clarify. That was the word they used. The message came through someone I barely knew from compliance. Would you be open to reviewing a legacy logic model you previously managed? The current team is encountering inconsistencies and would value your insight. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission. It was a request wrapped in corporate politeness. I said yes. Not because I owed them anything, but because I knew exactly where they were heading and how far off course they already were. When I arrived, Lucas greeted me like an old colleague. "We really appreciate your time," he said, smiling like nothing had happened. "We just want to understand what may have been carried forward that we weren't aware of." He handed me a printout of the current report and circled the mismatch total. "This number doesn't align with its underlying sections. We believe it may be a remnant of an older consolidation method." I flipped through the document. It wasn't familiar. The formatting was new. The labels were renamed. The formulas were gone. I asked to see the actual file they used. Lucas hesitated, then called someone in to pull it up. What I saw confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't reused anything I left behind. There was nothing of mine in that sheet, not even the protective redundancies I had embedded to catch errors like this. Everything had been replaced, streamlined. Mira sat across from me. She didn't speak at first, but when I asked who compiled the submission, she raised her hand. I asked one question. Did you build this total by summing across tabs, or was it linked from a master cell? She looked at Lucas, then down at the table. I added each section manually. The totals were sent to me by the department heads. I nodded. Then I asked another question. Were the entries time-stamped? She hesitated. Some were. Some I had to request again because the versions kept changing. I turned to Lucas. And no interim check file? No control sheet? He folded his arms. We removed those steps to reduce noise. They created bottlenecks and confusion. I didn't argue. I opened my own laptop, brought up the archived version from the same quarter a year earlier, showed them how each total was tracked, time-stamped, cross-referenced, showed them the logic map, the one that flagged if a section was added twice or if two departments claimed overlapping costs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I just showed the system I'd built and the one they replaced it with. The room was quiet. Lucas leaned back, jaw tight. Mira looked like she was seeing the architecture for the first time and realizing how far from it she'd drifted. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. I just closed the file, looked at the two of them, and said, "That total didn't come from anything I built, but I can show you exactly how it got there." Lucas didn't waste time. By the next morning, a new internal memo went out, addressed to senior staff, compliance, and the executive office. It didn't name me directly, but the subtext was clear. Legacy architecture remains the likely origin of recent consolidation anomalies, it read. We are reviewing past reporting logic for embedded inefficiencies carried into current workflows. It sounded careful, clinical, but everyone knew who it pointed to. I was called back for a second review, this time with more people in the room. Legal, finance, internal risk, the kind of audience you don't gather unless you're looking to shift accountability. Lucas stood at the front of the room with a laser pointer, clicking through a reconstructed flowchart of the current reporting process. On one side, he labeled a section, Inherited Formulas. On the other, Updated clean structure. He paused before one node. This area, he said, appears to have originated in our older methodology. We believe that's where the issue began. I raised my hand. Can you show me where that formula came from? He clicked the cell. It was manually entered. No link, no carryover, no inheritance. Then how is that a legacy formula? I asked. He hesitated. The structure surrounding it may have suggested a continuation of prior logic. I opened my laptop. I had the logs, not just the file, the version history, time-stamped, archived, immutable. I projected the original report from the same quarter, 1 year prior. Every formula mapped, every control sheet intact, no manual entries. The total matched its components. The review notes showed each line checked, flagged, corrected. I zoomed in on the final control tab, one that had been removed in the new version. This sheet used to run a cross-check. Any mismatch would turn this cell red. I clicked the next slide. The new version. The same cell? Gone. I turned back to Lucas. You didn't inherit this error. You deleted the system that would have caught it. The room went still. Mira looked down. I could see her fingers tighten. Her face flushed, not with anger, but with something more dangerous. Realization. Lucas straightened his shoulders. The prior system was overly complex. It created dependencies that weren't sustainable. I answered without raising my voice. It created accountability. That's why you removed it. The CEO said nothing. He just asked for the logs to be sent to his office. The meeting ended without a vote, but I knew what had landed. They came looking for proof that I was the problem, and I gave them proof of what I protected, and what they broke trying to erase it. They didn't schedule a formal hearing. They didn't need to. The CEO called a short meeting with only 5 people in the room. Lucas, Mira, the head of IT infrastructure, a legal observer, and me. No slides, no documents. Just one screen and one question. He turned to IT. Can you pull the access history on the cell validations and formula locks from the last 6 months? The technician nodded. We already did. He projected the timeline, a grid of dates and edits, each one linked to an internal ID. There it was. 2 months ago, the checkpoint sheet I had built, the one that ran overnight cross-checks across departmental totals, had been deleted. Not disabled, not hidden. Removed from the template at the source file level. The user tag beside it was clear. It wasn't Mira. It was Lucas. He cleared his throat. Those changes were part of the overall simplification initiative. At the time, I assessed that the checks were redundant, given the improved discipline across departments. The CEO leaned forward. Did you consult anyone before removing it? Lucas paused. But I believed the revised process could carry the same integrity. The legal observer asked calmly, Did you document that belief? There was no answer. Mira sat silent. She hadn't looked at me since I walked in, but now I saw her glance sideways. A brief, unsettled flicker. I knew that look. She realized the system she had trusted wasn't structured. It was improvised, and she had been its face. The CEO didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just looked down at the printout and said, So the safeguard that would have caught the $4.8 million gap was deliberately removed, without review, without backup, and without any formal sign-off. No one corrected him. Lucas tried again. The actual mismatch came from the department entries. We only aggregated what was given. I spoke for the first time. That's why the checkpoint existed, to confirm whether what was given could be trusted. Silence. Then the CEO turned to legal. Pause all new report submissions. I want an internal review of every logic change made this year. Start with the reporting template. He stood up. That was the end of the meeting. Lucas didn't walk out first. He waited. Maybe for someone to speak. Maybe for someone to step in. No one did. And I didn't look back at him. There was nothing left to say. They didn't just remove a checkpoint. They removed the one thing that didn't let mistakes hide. And now, for the first time, the mistake had a name and a timestamp. The message didn't come from Lucas. It came from the CEO's office. Direct, short, and without pretense. We'd like to speak with you about returning, not as a consultant. We'd like to offer you full reintegration to lead the restoration of reporting integrity. I stared at it for a moment, not because I was surprised. I wasn't. But because it was the first time they'd called it what it was, a collapse. One quiet enough that the public never saw it, but loud enough inside to shake every corridor of trust they thought was automation. They didn't want me back for what I could do. They wanted me back because everything else had failed. Lucas had been suspended indefinitely. IT revoked his access. Legal began a full audit of reporting decisions made under his supervision. Mira had been quietly reassigned to a different division, one without summary-level authority. No one spoke about it. No internal memo, no town hall, just silence in the hallway where her name used to echo. When I arrived at the meeting, no one offered me a new badge. No one gave a tour or a title. The CEO was already seated, a single folder in front of him. This time, he didn't start with vision. He started with honesty. We didn't understand what your work was doing. We saw friction and flagged it as inefficiency. We were wrong. The structure you built was protecting something we stopped checking. Now, we're asking if you're willing to come back and rebuild it. I let the words settle. There was no emotion behind them, no defensiveness, just consequence. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness, only for function. I said no, not because I was angry, not because I didn't want the role, but because what they were asking for wasn't a job. It was absolution, and that wasn't mine to give. I'm not coming back to manage the rebuild, I said, calm and clear. I'm here to give you the blueprint for what it should have been before you started dismantling it. He nodded, slowly. We'll take what you're willing to share. I handed him a hard copy, then a drive. Inside was everything. A logic map that spanned 3 years of decision chains, a version tracker with every key transition flagged, a color-coded risk index by reporting phase, layered validation points, escalation flowcharts, redundant protection paths. It was a system not built for trust, but for verification, the kind that doesn't need memory, only discipline. I also handed over a one-page document titled Conditions of Restoration. It didn't list titles, compensation, or reporting lines. It listed boundaries, what the system would not tolerate again. No manually adjusted summaries. No single author sign-offs past draft. No file with more formatting than substance. No silence around missing checkpoints. They could change the people. They could change the software. But if they wanted the work to hold, the logic had to stay. He read every line, didn't interrupt. When he was done, he looked at me and said, "This is stricter than what we had before." I nodded. That's the point. I left without signing anything. No ceremony, no welcome back post. As I stepped into the elevator, I passed the empty conference room where Lucas used to run his efficiency briefings. The posters had been taken down. His whiteboard still had half a phrase scrawled in green marker. It read, "Speed shows confide." That was all that was left. And down the hall, on the desk they used to clear out mine, someone was printing my logic chart. Not for archive, for implementation. They didn't need me to run the system, but they couldn't run it without what I left behind. They never asked again, not for my return, not for a title, not for a second round of negotiation. They had what they needed. And for once, they understood that was enough. The reporting system was rewritten around the conditions I handed over. My logic became mandatory protocol. Every report from that point forward had a locked summary validator. Every department submission went through time-stamped escalation. Every final total required dual source confirmation, not because I insisted, but because the gaps they'd allowed once had nearly burned them. They tried not to make it obvious. My name didn't appear on any new document. No formal acknowledgement circulated. But 2 weeks after I handed over the structure, the department renamed the internal QA sequence. It was no longer called Final Review. It was called Mercer Pass. I didn't ask for that. I wouldn't have approved it. But I didn't stop it either. One of the interns reached out, a name I didn't recognize. She said she was using one of the old trackers I'd built. She said the CEO had told her to follow it to the letter, no shortcuts. She didn't ask for advice. She just wanted to say she didn't know what the job really was until she saw the notes I'd left behind. That was enough. Lucas never came back. Mira stayed, but she moved quietly through the ranks, no longer near anything labeled approval. I never reached out. And no one ever tried to explain what happened. Not the collapse, not the blame, not the shift. I didn't need an apology. I just didn't want the narrative rewritten because people like me, the ones who don't demand a spotlight, we don't leave trails to be remembered. We leave systems that don't break when others stop looking. And that's what I gave them. Not presence, not performance, just proof. If clearing your name meant more than reclaiming your job, leave a 1 in the comments. I want to know who's ever had to fight not for credit, but for correction. And if stories like this speak to something you've lived through, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and stay close. The next story might sound too familiar to skip.